Okie doke. I talked with a number of people during lunch, and I got a number of pieces of feedback on where we're at. So I thought maybe I would share that feedback to get us started and see whether or not you all agree with it. I think the feedback I got came in 3 categories. Category number 1, that what I was suggesting that we do, develop a set of guidance on what you measure and what you measure it with, in other words, what instruments that you get to do it, is worth doing. That it is worth doing because we want to entrain some of these other players. They're going to provide valuable information in the system. They're going to build out CCAN in a very positive way, so it's worth doing. It's also worth doing because it will create a set of communication amongst ourselves at the next level that we need to get to, even amongst the groups that are already doing it. So that's point number 1. Point number 2 was, while it's worth doing, set expectations low. And the idea wasn't so much set expectations low because Jason volunteered to do it, but set expectations low because it's a moving target. That there's still a little bit of agreement that has yet to be dealt with in terms of what is truly best, or even what are the different categories of best, because you have, we're still wrestling a little bit with how many categories of users there are, of data providers there are, and how you'd want to make different recommendations to different groups based upon their finances, based upon their additional needs beyond the point 2, based upon their capabilities. So that's one reason to set expectations low. The other is that it's a moving target. That what we would recommend today may not be what we recommend in 6 months, and this thing may take 6 months for us to develop. So just be cognizant that this is a good thing to do, but don't expect a cookbook in 2 weeks. The third feedback I got was that I've actually disaggregated 2 things that need to be aggregated. I separated which parameter to measure and what instruments to use to make the measurements from the training and quality assurance. And I think it was Andrew who said, I can tell you what to measure, right? I can tell you where to buy the instruments. The problem is, you may be better off to buy the instruments and leave them in the box because I can't tell you how to calibrate them, all right? There's no instruction manuals that come with these things. There's no set QA that goes with them. And so really the advice people need is less what instruments to buy and more how to use the instruments to achieve the quality goal. And so anyway, that's the 3 pieces of feedback that I felt I got over lunch. I am curious, do people agree with those 3 pieces of feedback? Worth doing? Is there anybody who disagrees that this is worth doing? That we want to try and put together a guidance manual? Is there anybody who disagrees and thinks that's a waste of time and it's going to distract us? Hearing none. Number 2. Actually, this one's easier. We set our sights low. While we set, when we set this as a goal, we don't try, in a sense, oversell it as we're going to have a cookbook in a short time period. That we essentially put some people together to do this, but we recognize that it's going to evolve continuously. No objections to that one? The third is, let's move quickly from what we measure to the QA process. And in fact, what we do is we kind of skip over number 2. We'll come back to that one. And before we kind of finish this one out, we talk about the actions we would take under number 3. So it was the QA and training. Does anybody disagree with that? That that's where the action is? Nobody disagrees. Cool, we have 3 points of agreement. That's always good. All right, then are people okay if I kind of shift down and hit the slide on training and QA? And then what we'll do is we'll kind of come back to this one. I want to walk out of here with action items. So we'll come back to this one later in terms of assignments, but after we talk about training and QA.
Yeah, I'm going to keep pressing you back. So
Okay.
I would like to see it, and I'd like to hear how other people feel about it, that the which parameters to measure bullet can be in the report that we used as the finalization of this report. And that seems seems we're all pretty clear on that, so there's no reason why we can't move forward on that.
So I'll turn to Andrew. He's the one who's writing the final report.
Yes, I think that's an appropriate thing. It's a sensible follow-up from the working groups and discussions that we've had, and would indeed be an appropriate fragment of such a roadmap as we proposed.
So what we're saying is that, when's this report due?
Finally one?
Yeah.
December 31st.
Okay.
By
So-
the same token, your bullet number 2, where to measure, I will argue that we can put down on a piece of paper right now what are the observing sites that represent CCAN at this point in time. And for the purposes of his report, I think that's a very important thing for us to do. But there's a step in there that we need to do today. And today is we got to get agreement that of the people that here that are providing those observing sites that they are committed to being a CCAN participant.
So I think that's a very good discussion, and it's one I very much would like to have. But I think because people suggested that 1 and 3 are linked together.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we get to that.
We're going to come
point.
back to number 2.
Okay.
We'll just skip over it for the
All right.
moment.
All right,
So
thank
because
you.
these things are linked.
So I think Dick was just saying we could write some of this down right now. Why don't we write it down? I mean, we know what the parameters are. I'd like to see them up on the screen and say, okay, we've agreed on this. And then I'd like to say, here's the list, the Omega's assets, the PCSGA assets. You know, I mean, I just think we're a lot farther along. Andrew said we can't write the mythical tome yet, but we can write the table of contents right here today, and we can put it up where we can look at it. I mean, it's already written, right? We already have these files from the previous meetings. I would like to see where we're at, I guess, visually. So I don't know if people agree with that, but.
Yeah, Andrew and I had the conversation earlier today, and he's prepared to type. So if there's a moment that we want to start collating language or lists, we'll start composing on the screen. But I'll leave that up to our facilitator, Steve.
Yeah, let's come back, let's deal on the broad concepts of kind of where we're going in the actions, and then we'll do the actions after we've agreed on the broad concepts. I'm afraid if we get what will happen is we do it, there are going to be some small arguments that probably will have to be going off to a small subcommittee to deal with. Okay, ready to talk then about training? Okay, so I'm suggesting that there are a series of actions here, all right? The first action has to do with talking a little bit more about the things that Andrew's doing and the things that NIST's doing. I think number 2, the thing we need to talk about is training video. Andrew told me I'm incorrect in the sense that the California Water Board money probably can't be used for video. On the other hand, we had Gretchen step up and say, made the offer before lunch that she'd like to. So in a sense, that's an action item. So there's an action item associated with NIST and the kind of standards that Andrew has. There's an action item associated with a video. But I'd suggest the biggest action item, particularly in the context of essentially how do we entrain new groups into it, is the last one. That where we've had hatcheries take on things, where we had the Seattle Aquarium take on things, we're going to bring new players in. It's because they had a mentor. They had a foster mom who would come in and train them in how to do it. And I think, given everything that I've heard about how difficult it is to do this and how there's as much art as there is science in doing it, that having local trainers who people can go to and observe in their laboratory and do the kind of hands-on that Andrew was talking about. And then those are their resources to go back to when they're running into problems. Or maybe even those are the groups that will do some local QA or intercalibration is the way to go. I'm putting that out there as a suggestion. My vision, and not necessarily your vision, so I'm not insulted if you disagree, but that we would have, I'll throw out the number 3, we have 3 ooze regions. We have a Nanus region, a Senkus region, and a SCUS region, that we essentially have somebody who becomes the trainer and the QA person for each of those regions, and that those 3 are tightly coordinated, and then essentially they figure out how they're going to train together. Now, that may take some money, and that may take some other kinds of things, but I'm putting forward, I think that's the model, because everything I heard today is you can't write that level of detail into a manual, it has to be a lot of hands-on, partly because it's fluid, partly because you're not going to do it justice in a manual. Thoughts on this?
My thought on that is that it makes very good sense to have that training mechanism. My concern is that if you don't also have the manual, you don't have any way to focus it, keep it uniform, and allow the people that were trained to effectively pass on information to their local colleagues.
I absolutely agree. I think all three of these things, you know, essentially a manual, a training video, on-site training, and essentially the help desk that follows from that are all part of a system. And they build off of each other in an incredible way. As you said before, you can't do the video unless you've agreed on what you're going to do in the video. So Bruce, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I was just wondering, Jonathan mentioned having kind of a workshop for people who are already pretty much up to speed but need to calibrate their equipment. And don't you think that idea could, at the very least, you could have people who are interested in learning come watch and observe? Or, I mean, I thought, you know, before you train new people, the first step might be better to make sure that the people that are already involved in the network are on the same page. I mean, that somehow seems to come before that step.
I think I don't think it comes before. That is the first step. You've got to get that level of agreement on what the different groups are going to train. I mean, the alternative is to have just one that does it for the West Coast. I just don't think that's as feasible if you're in the position where you can drive to the local. So you get, I threw out number 3. It doesn't have to be 3, but you throw out 3, you get the 3 of them coordinating, and you get that, and essentially you take the thing that, you know, Jason's going to help write, and you start to put down some of those things. You get them to agree with you, get on site, they all start to work together. You reflect what they're talking about in the manual.
But am I understanding something different? I mean, I thought you were trying to bring people who aren't on board in, and I thought Jonathan was talking about trying to get the people who are already doing it to be on the same page. And I don't know, somehow you got to do that first.
Agreed.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm sorry, Bruce, I talked past you. We crossed, but yes, I absolutely agree. All right, I put forward that, so again, if we're fleshing out that idea, and I'm throwing out the idea 3, let me add levels of specificity to it. Next level of specificity, I threw out 3, and the reason is, again, because I kind of think about it as a driving distance kind of thing. And I would suggest that, to me, just from a geographical basis, there are several that pop out to me. I mean, you've got the people at Oregon State in the north who are already doing this with a number of groups. You have, Tessa's gone, so we can point her out, but you've got somebody like Tessa at Bodega who's already doing this with groups. You probably could find some people at Moss Landing or other places, but Mavari, but you know, Tessa's already actively seeking out hatcheries and training people. And you have in the south, you've got Andrew, who has been, you know, doing this with lots of folks already. Is 3 the right number? Are those the right people? Are there others that we should be thinking of instead or in addition? I mean, I'm sure Gretchen could do it. Should we say there's another because you don't want to drive 3 hours to get to San Diego? And Gretchen says no.
She agrees.
She agrees. No. So, well, this is just a proposal. So, based upon what Bruce said, the teachers can't teach until they know what's in the syllabus and what we're doing. And the idea of having multiple coastal locations where we train ourselves and others is great, but I wonder if one possibility isn't to build the first node and then replicate it from there, so that we would start, I don't know, Scripps or even Bodega, but just hold our first workshop there and say, well, what would be in the syllabus? And Andrew's already shown me an incredible piece of footage of his hands sampling water.
My invaluable technician's hands.
Those weren't your, man, I feel cheated. never mind. No. So we have some resources already, and we could kind of gather together and figure out what that looks like. Once we had one good set of tools, and it would be great to get input from Alan and other people who have been working with these things in the field, and then we can start that way, and then proliferate if needed, because we don't know how many customers we'll have.
How do others feel? Skylar had her hand up. Somebody needs to give her a microphone.
I want to support that, because there actually can be a training proof of concept workshop. You know, I imagine we can host it at Bodega or something, and you know, come up with some small amount of support to get people there, and not only just literally do the training, but literally think how to best do the training and best do it in a way that's most replicable. So I like the idea of starting off slow, and I think that's actually a very big step.
So you're endorsing the idea of having one group do the training and maybe having some of these potential other trainers attend that workshop where they're doing a training
Yeah.
and give feedback as to how they like what was done and how they might do it differently in their
I think
region
that's
and subsequently.
a really big leap forward.
So that's what you're suggesting, correct, Gretchen? Did I capture it?
Yeah, I mean,
Others agree with that?
yeah, that's great. I mean, if you've ever done team teaching or, you know, trying to teach a group of people, we need to get our act together before we try to do anything else.
The OA masterclass.
Yeah, masterclass. Guru, Yoda. Others agree with this? Is this a good direction to go?
I agree. It's a good direction to go. I'm getting the impression that people are still underestimating the work involved in doing that. I've been involved in three such training courses. One that was held at Woods Hole, an ocean acidification training, which invited a number of us there to lecture. They had some equipment we tried to give people experience on. It was a great social occasion, and some people learned something. I was at another one, which was at Friday Harbor, which was, the people were there for 6 weeks. So they had a chance to learn something, and a chance to make mistakes that they could learn from. That's not what we're really imagining here, I suspect. I had a third one where I had it here at Scripps. I ran a class for our graduate students, letting them use the equipment in my lab and giving them practice on it. And they come back and say, can we use the equipment? And I say, yes, if we train you. And they say, well, didn't we in the class? No. You got to see what the equipment does, and you actually touched it. So bear in mind, this is not really so. The other part that just strikes my mind is, I can't speak for the other locations, but if you came to my lab at Scripps now, I do not have the appropriate equipment for the level of simplicity and straightforwardness we're looking for. My equipment was selected to be able to produce the best possible numbers if really competent people run it. So we would need to buy new equipment and practice with it before we could ever train anybody to use it.
So what you're saying is some really crappy biological lab like mine should do it. Isn't that what you're saying? God.
Be my guest.
That's right. That's what he's saying. My lab's too perfect. Okay, so here's the thing. I really, please want to hear from you guys, Terry, Ian, Alan, Dennis, because, you know, as biologists, we've been on that end of the stick of, well, how do you fill that bottle to take a water sample, and what kind of bottle should it be? So we've been down that road. And when I say develop the syllabus, it really would be, for me, a very real-world activity. If we're going to have assets in the water, where do we start? Sir.
So as we were talking at lunch, with having deployed the instrumentation, it took me 2 days to even become just marginally familiar with what it was. I have to rely on Tessa and her staff as a backup. Like, I pull it out of the water, I'm going to be doing basic maintenance, but there's a level that I can go to, I stop right there, and I have to defer to them for not only the maintenance, beyond maintenance, but also on, as we were also talking about, Andrew, on if there is an issue, there's a flow chart for me to follow from my side. As long as I can provide the citing for the collateral, there's the beginnings of the node right there. And then I can expand out to somebody that's available 45 minutes away. That, to me, is a practical way to be running this in an efficient way. And I'm relying on them on a level of expertise.
Yeah, so in a lot of ways, I mean, we do this in our little microcosm. You develop a protocol so that, and Pauline can speak to this because she does it.
So, I mean, we pray at the altar of the Dixon et al. SOPs, but I mean, that lays out the standard operating procedures, and I can see where we could start with, the little video of how to fill a bottle, and, what you were mentioning about, what should you do, and I'm thinking that, part of this training is we create like a flow chart / decision tree, like, okay, can I do spec pH here? No, I can't. So then what are my options? Do I do an electrode pH measurement? Do I bottle in poison and send it off for analysis later? Like, that should be part of this first step to creating, how we will further train people down the road.
Any other thoughts about utility? Come on, I know you want to say something.
I think Andrew's right. A one-day workshop's not going to help me really much at all to learn the things I need to learn about maintaining our combined system. I mean, it's going to take a lot longer than that. It's going to take me making mistakes, and there's not really time. The people that know how to do this don't have the time to do it. Babysit me for a week or two, So one thing Andy has done is, gone to OSU and made it easier on Bert to help him out and Dale to help him out. But you just can't sit down and do it in one day. I mean, it's just not possible. So I agree, this is a great idea, but it has to be a little bit more intensive if there's any hope of getting some good information out of it. And I like Jonathan's idea, by the way, of bring your probe, come to the workshop. That's at least with like DERFETs or something like that, that could be very valuable, I think. So.
I wonder if there are two tiers, maybe more, of training that are needed. One is for people who are in the position that Alan's in and Benoit's in and Terry that you're in. You've got instruments in the water, you're learning how to use them. Ian, you're probably in the same position, I'm guessing. And it's an interesting question. I don't know who's got what in the water among the folks who are here who are growers or run hatcheries or nurseries. But the set of questions you face when you've got a working production facility into which you stick an instrument are different than the questions you face if you're trying to really, for example, run the bottle chemistry and validate the data. And both are needed. You need a lot more people at this on the ground level to learn something and be able to produce replicable, precise results. And you need fewer people who can kind of do some of what Andrew's lab does. I'm not clear on how many it's even feasible to dream of. I mean, if you run the clock forward here, picture if we come up with an idea of how much monitoring is required and then start applying that globally in all the places that need this kind of attention, Andrew laughs. We might need hundreds of labs that can do what his lab does. I'm not sure if that's too many, but I'm thinking it could scale up that far. And we might need at least thousands who can do what, at this point, Andy and a handful of other people here know how to do. And those are two really different levels of knowledge, and both need to be trained too. They're sort of different functions.
So Brad, let me put in context what I had in mind, which is we talked about the weather scale and the climate scale. I think what I've been talking about, I should have been more explicit, is the weather scale. That essentially what you're trying to do with the climate scale, the level of training, And the how-to manual for that is at a whole different level. I think what we're talking about is how do we build up a network?
And I don't mean to argue with that at all. It's just that in order to get the standard of data that Alan will tell you he needs, you have to have somebody who knows what Andrew knows to help you get there and correct you when you're wildly off course. So it isn't just, the divide between the two is a little more grayscale. And we need to scale up the competency at the Andrew and his lab level as well.
So that's actually a good topic, because essentially where you want to get is a good place to get. There are going to be multiple levels of precision that different people are going to want. I think what I was thinking is, let's get our foot in the door. If we've set aragonite saturation state as our core measurement, we set 0.2 as our goal, and using something like a hatchery or a WAML lab as an example, somebody's got a flow-through system. How do we give them advice on what it is that they should buy if you only want to do this kind of core thing, the thing that's not the $60,000 unit, but the $10,000 unit? How do you do that, and how do we train people so that they can do that? If it turns out that Alan finds out that he needs to do at a higher level, then essentially there becomes customizations of how he deals with people for doing that. But for getting the network together so that you can compare across sites and you can compare to the biology, if 0.2 is what we're aiming for, then that's what we set this initial round of training towards.
If we can keep it that simple, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
So
and
Steve,
the complexity will come in later. If we can be successful at that, the next thing we'll do is so Alan, you want to?
Well, I guess, point of clarification, I mean, we're requiring that people measure pH and PCO2, right? And so the level of expertise required to come to a workshop and calibrate your DERFET, assuming it's stable over several months, not that big of a deal, but PCO2 systems are necessarily complicated. And so we are, by insisting that you measure both, CCAN's insisting that people be trained more effectively. It's a lot more involved to deal with a PCO2 system than it is a simple black box pH meter. It's not a black box. So anyway, that's a comment.
I think it does seem feasible that we could have maybe a 1-week workshop for doing discrete sample analysis and a 1-week workshop for doing continuous monitoring, and that people could bring their instruments or their samples or whatever to these workshops. And it's going to be work for sure to organize these workshops so we can get funding from somewhere to do that work and to have these workshops, and they would be highly valuable to all of us. And it doesn't seem far-fetched at all to me to do these and to organize these. So, I mean, I think this is really worth just putting up there.
So let's talk money for a minute. I mean, what I had in mind when I started this conversation is 3 groups, each getting about $30,000 so that they could do 1 week a year of training or 2 weeks a year of training where labs in their region come in, and then another 2 or 3 weeks of time that they have available throughout the year to kind of service and
I'd like to suggest what Gretchen said is let's just do it in one place.
Well, all right, so I'm saying that's where I started. What I'm hearing now is don't start there. Start with picking a place and doing the 1 week or maybe 2 weeks of training at that place, and then have some of these other groups that might evolve into these other centers come and attend that training so they can kind of see whether they want to do it and expand to different geographies, which becomes an even cheaper proposition because you only have one doing it. So, in fact, I'm going to put forward that we have a perfect opportunity. If we go and we talk with the WAML labs, and if they express interest, and I expect that many of them will, because many of them are already measuring some carbon parameters, and I'm betting that they would all go, ooh, if I could get some help and some agreement, I'd be willing to do it. But they would need that level of training, even the people who work at marine laboratories. Is that a good target group to aim for? If they so desire, not that we would pay them to come, but we'd offer a service. And then anybody else who wanted to attend could also attend. Is that a good path forward?
I guess, Steve, I really like your WAML idea, but I do also want to be sensitive to the fact that we've got folks who are measuring now, and we've got systems that are measuring now, and if we do some training, I think we should really focus on that before we
on the new ones.
Go on to new ones. And I think you're thinking of a way to get the training available by training these people, but my sense is that's going to take some time, and I think it's a great idea of yours to go forward on in training them and getting them excited about that and seeing what could develop. But I think we've really got to focus the training on the existing systems.
Others agree with that? I mean, they don't have to be exclusive. I mean, it could be that we do both at the same time. It all depends on how many people would want that.
So I'm in a WAML lab, the Romberg-Tiburon Center. It's part of SenCUS and SF Beams, and we measure pH. I don't, but it is measured continuously using that I think would not be acceptable to this group. We have a YSI sensor that's stuck in the water. I have no idea how it's calibrated, what the uncertainty is like on those data. And I think that it would behoove us to collect data that would be of broad utility. And so I think they're, just saying to the WAML group, look, there are some standards you have to consider when you're making these sorts of measurements, and we're going to help to guide what those standards should be, and we want you to pay attention and get involved. I think that would be a good level to start at. And I might add, as I mentioned to you at lunch, that because it's in San Francisco Bay, that is the Romberg-Tiburon Center is in San Francisco Bay, where we have the nastiest water you'll probably get on your coast. It's an estuary, it's an ocean, it's polluted, it's variable, it's fresh. It would be a good place to say, if it works here, and if we get data that we actually trust here, we could probably do it just about anywhere.
So going back to Jan's question about newbies versus people already doing it, I'm curious, if we set up one of these one-week trainings, how many of you all that are already taking measurements would attend that? There's enough. I was thinking combined, maybe we could combine that with some of the WAML, but there's almost enough right here.
I just think that for me to raise my hand is really ridiculous, because I would bring like at least 5 people in the Nanus region whose data streams we are serving who aren't in this room. So I guess my thought, if there's existing WAMLs, great, they're existing. I just don't want to wait until we get it's just a matter of sequencing. I want training to happen sooner than later. It's not so much about newbies versus old, it's just that we got to do something for existing systems, and I want to do it soonest.
Steve, are we talking, I'm trying to get clear on something too, or if we're talking about training based upon the utility of the use, are we talking about training that's going to be for hatchery use or for daily applied use, or are we talking about training that's going to be more on a climate basis for policy making down the road? And is there a dichotomy there that we need to address in the training, or are we going to establish which instrument's going to be used from an applied standpoint right now? So whether it's a CFET or DuraFET being used at Terry's spot or over at Allen's place, so that we can get them up and going on that and making sure that they're using those instruments in a level that's acceptable for inclusion in the CCAN network that can then go on to the policy side.
Right, so what I was envisioning is, first off, the weather scale, not the climate scale. Again, just to get us started, this kind of training you'll want to do at the climate later, when you have, in a sense, almost different tiers of data providers. But start with the weather scale. Start with essentially the document that Jason would be writing or leading, which says, here is, based upon 2 or 3 user classes, here's the sensors that we would recommend, and then picking 1 or 2 of those sensor combinations that says, if you want to use this sensor combination, we're going to run a training for how you would do that. You wouldn't try and do them all, and the idea would be that Jason's group would narrow down all of the combinations to the most likely combinations, and then you train off of that.
Perfect.
I've got a chat from Terry. She's saying, if we don't train the WAMO folks, will they develop their own techniques and instrument standards? I think we need to help existing and be strategic to make sure that folks that are interested in becoming involved can see what would be needed. So that's from Terry.
Maybe I could make a proposal that gets us partway there in a direction that we could probably achieve if somebody would provide the wallet. We could have the materials and the training workshop aimed at educating people how to use Durafet style sensors, including the CFET, sufficiently well to measure pH within 0.02 in pH. I think it would take a week. One would probably also need a certain amount of money to get some equipment that was actually right there with the training people. There would need to be some thinking about who really did the training and what was done. I was costing this up in my own mind. The people in my laboratory that are capable of training others to do this would cost you $5,000 for the week while they actually did it, and another $10,000 for the 2 weeks while they thought about how to get this going. Minimum. Extra if they have to buy the equipment as well, which they would in that particular case, but in other labs that may not be true. But I think by focusing on pH alone and Durafet sensors alone, we cover a lot of people's interest. We make progress. We don't hit the comment that Alan was pointing out, which is pH alone probably is not giving you everything you need to know. But the current stage is you want to get a PCO2 system in addition to the 10,000 you spent getting the pH system running properly. You want another 25,000 and more training. So maybe the first step is to say, okay, pick one parameter. My proposal is pH. Pick one style of sensor. My proposal is the Durafet-based sensors, and ask what we can do sensibly with this. It is still not going to be free, and if there are people volunteering to do it, great. But I'm going to need more than a plane fare.
How do people feel about that proposal? I see one thumbs up.
I think it's a great start, and that's in stereo.
I don't think you'd have to buy a lot of sensors, by the way. I mean, I would bring it. You know, I think we would all bring our sensors, and I'll bring the PCO2 system. And, you know, that's what Andy did with Burke. He took his PCO2 system to the lab, and they spent, what, a couple days? One day, and just went over it. You know, so, I mean, buying a lot of instrumentation wouldn't be necessary. Yeah, yeah. I have money.
So, all right, so I'm going to give you... So, Andrew, I'll give you a contrary point of view, which is, okay.
And I feel we should be doing this for those Western Marine labs as well.
Okay. Let me give you a contrary viewpoint. I think maybe you started with the Durafet sensor and focusing on pH, but I think if we're going to go ask for money, you go and you ask for the whole package. And you feel, because I think if you go, the way I'm looking at this is, I would feel very comfortable making a phone call to the Moore Foundation, because I was the one to talk with them originally and say, we had some successes. I would rattle off everything that Gretchen said, and I would finish with, and we're going to identify the sensor, the measurement things that you could use. But what this group decided is the problem is not figuring out what to measure or even what instrument to buy. The problem is the training necessary to do it. So you've got a group that's ready to go. They've agreed that saturation state's the right thing. They've agreed that they've got a 0.2 unit, but you need to get them there. If you simply sell them on pH, then essentially you haven't got them there. If you sell them at a higher price tag, even if, you know, I didn't add up all your numbers, but essentially what you're saying is like 15,000 for the first. I'd rather sell them on 60,000 and say, now you're going to have all these new labs doing things all the same. And even the labs that are already doing it are doing it more consistently. I think that's an easier sell.
I agree with you. My recommendation was made in the sense of which should we do first, not what total package we should do.
And that I have no disagreement with.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. And when I said, you know, don't focus on WAML, I didn't mean that we would exclude existing WAMLs. Please don't think that was what I was saying. What I'm saying is, let's take a step that we can take now. And I think Andrew's suggestion is a really good one. I think existing systems is a really good one. Let's not lose sight of where we want to go, which is your suggestion, and getting more WAML folks online. Those are great. That's our vision. But I think what Andrew's suggested is a great way forward.
Can we get Honeywell to chip in money for this since everyone's going to be buying them?
That's a very good question.
I doubt it.
No harm in asking.
None at all. But I would just point out that we are something like less than 0.1% of their market, even if everybody in the room buys 10 sensors. But with charismatic megafauna, perhaps.
What would be the second sensor that you would, or what would be the second parameter, and then what would be the second sensor you would do the training on?
Then it comes to a discussion of, do you want to do the continuous measurement of PCO2, or do you want to do the discrete, though potentially with reasonable frequency of repetition, measurement of total carbon? I think that would be the next one.
Okay. So those are exactly the kind of things I think you can kind of walk through with Jason and kind of figure out what are the packages you want to put together, and then figure out, based upon the feedback you're getting from people, what they're doing or planning to do, which would be the next in the logical training sequence. Everybody agree with where we're headed with this? All right, I've seen a lot of heads not up.
To add to what Andrew's saying, to do a discrete PCO2 is very hard. Only a few people can do it. So continuous PCO2, we have a better chance as a community to do successfully. With respect to DIC, we have the capability now of doing discrete DICs. We're working on continuous DICs, but that's still experimental. So that's where we're at right now. That's why the decisions have to be carefully thought through.
So I guess the question is, if we want to move forward with that, who's going to do that training? Is it Andrew?
My lab would be happy to do or help with training at the cost it costs. I'm in the unfortunate situation of having recently looked at the projection of how much money I have to pay the people that are working in the lab and the projects they're now working on. So to do projects they're not being paid for is out of the question.
Okay. Well, so there are multiple levels to answer this question. The first is Andrew the right guy to do it if we had money and wanted to pay him, or there's somebody else that we should be doing this? And the second is, so let's say he's the right guy, but we don't have the money, somebody else want to do it for free. So, anybody want to do it for free? Burke? Where'd Burke go? He's hiding in the back. Are there people who, in a sense, already have money that they're getting to do something like this, and this is a good venue for them to do it? Hearing none and not seeing Burke even give me eye contact. So, if we're going to pay somebody, is Andrew the right guy to do it? Do you have somebody at like Gretchen's level do it? No. She's saying no. Burke, would you want to do it if we paid you? Or you think Andrew? I mean, I've got no skin in this game because I just need you all.
I think Andrew's answer applies to all of us, that, you know, there's a lot of interest in doing this. There's still a lot of interest in doing this, and you know, we're at a minimum break even on our service samples, but we've never really had a way of figuring out how to maintain this service analysis with, you know, long-term commitment to funding that would allow us to, you know, really sit down and say, okay, yeah, we've got 12 months a year of a dedicated technician to put on this for 5 years, so that we can really invest the effort into funding that person, training that person, with some commitment to stability. And, you know, I mean, maybe that's a pie in the sky request. You know, that's a lot of money to ask for and a lot of time to ask for it to be put in there. But, you know, I don't think we've gotten, you know, when we do samples piecemeal like we do, there's no guarantee that the next batch is coming in or anything like that. And it makes it very hard for me to say, okay, yeah, I've actually got enough work that I can project out the next 3 years to hire a new person that I can dedicate to this. And so, you know, I'd be very happy if there was a way that we could say, yeah, there's a person who's going to be our liaison and sample analysis technician that we've got money to pay at half-time for the next 5 years. Then I'd be willing to go out and think about making a new hire, dedicating somebody on staff to do that.
Half-time for the next 5 years is probably a different level than I'm thinking of.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And you know, I mean, as Andrew said, when you do some of this bootleg, you know, curiosity-driven stuff, and then that becomes expected, and you start saying, yeah, you know, my books don't really support doing this indefinitely at the level that we're doing it at. And so that, you know, I'd have to be very careful about how I said I would do something like this.
Because I think the level that I'm hearing Andrew talk about is a level that I think is very saleable. What I heard is basically a week of training on a FET with 2 weeks of preparation time. And then for continuous PCO2, same kind of thing. So essentially that's 6 weeks of time, throw in some supplies.
So,
you know,
so then I misinterpreted what you were asking about whether or not we were maintaining a stable of people who could do this.
Right, so that's the longer term.
Yeah.
Right now what I'm talking about is these first steps.
Can we write a proposal that would get the technical support to do a training workshop at a facility where there was that measurement capability for that kind of time commitment? Yeah, we could do that too.
Okay. So we'd have to figure out essentially who would want to do it. But I guess what I'm getting out of this is I should make a phone call tomorrow to the people who originally contacted me about this and say, this is what I got out of this workshop. You all got something started. You need to figure out whether you want to carry the ball the last 5 yards, because they figured out how they want to do it. And what they've said is it's a training problem at this point.
Steve, we have our annual Pacific Coast Shellfish Growers meeting coming up next month, and we'd have our budget talks at that point. And I'd be happy to bring it up to our association to see about helping to fund, you know, the training thing, because we've got an applied group that we can put this toward. But I might throw out that we might contact other applied users of this information so that maybe collectively we can fund the kind of training that we're going to need at the shellfish growers level or the aquarium level or what have you.
I got to tell you, and even if, you know, if you didn't pay for it, if you paid for part of it, that's the kind of thing that would take somebody at the Moore Foundation and just get their heart tickled.
So since Andrew's out of the room, we were whispering back and forth, and what we're talking about is different levels of expertise probably. So we need people who understand how the Durafet works, and we need to teach folks how to, let's just say, do the chemistry. So we need a lot of expertise there in one site, and we need the ability to teach it. And so I told this to Andrew, we talked about, he says, yes, you know, the truth of the matter is the UC group together with the resources we have, and Todd Merritt is here, understands the sensors, obviously, and but we don't have the people, the time, or the money to do it, and we know it. And it would be really disingenuous of me to congratulate all my postdocs who are struggling to find jobs that they're now going to teach this course. And so we've got the will and we've got the expertise in different places, but we don't have the money. So that's where we're at. I think, again, since Andrew's out of the room, I think we would do it, but it's really, really hard to bootleg this level of activity onto our research programs.
Okay. That's what I'm getting from everybody.
I mean, I think that getting the money is always a challenge, but that there's lots of opportunities that, you know, maybe we could get some RCN money from NSF. Maybe SBIR money could partially cover this since we're integrating across things. Maybe we could actually ask people to pay to go to this training workshop, although that hasn't been the CCAN model so far. Thank you very much. Maybe the Moore Foundation would pay. I mean, I think that if we had a vision and we could lay out a syllabus and a list of potential people and some charges, that it wouldn't be that tough to get the money.
I think that's exactly right. I think we shouldn't focus this meeting on exactly where that funding is going to come from, because I think we have a starting point by talking to the Moore Foundation. I think that's a great starting point. I think we should focus on what do we want to do, right? And say in this particular case, we have a very clear direction. We have a clear direction of something that Jason's going to start to do. This is the next part of it, associating the training with it. I think that's very saleable.
The original CCAN workshop started as a vision that we approached California Sea Grant. California Sea Grant approached the other West Coast Sea Grants. You got involved with funding. Robin Downey went back east and got $10,000 from IUS, and we put that thing together for $30,000 with a consortium of funders. And I'm just wondering, I know that budgets are really, really tight, but if we couldn't go back to those original funders and say, if you chipped in a few $1,000s each, then we could come to.
I think you're absolutely right. I think it would be more productive, instead of sitting here and listing all the people we could potentially approach for this. I think let's make sure we know what it is we want to achieve. And then, as you'll see at the end, we've got to come back to some of the questions that Skylie is going to address. Who's going to take the leadership in making those kind of things happen? I don't think there's a shortage of people we can.
Steve, part of going before a group to ask this question, though, it'd be really helpful to have a rounded off estimate to within at least 2 decimal places of what it might cost to put something like this together. And if we expect it to last a week, then what do we expect this to cost, and so that we can make that pitch.
Right, absolutely. I think, you know, when we talk about action items, I think that will be specifically one of them, is that we need to put together a syllabus, right? And then we need to put together a cost estimate. And I'm going to look to Andrew, and he's not paying attention, so he said yes.
Hi, just as the Seoul Sea Grant representative in the room, I'm taking notes, very detailed notes. And then, yeah, I mean, the numbers have ranged from some starting at 15 to 60. So I can't speak for all the Sea Grant programs. I can't even really speak for my own, but I think this is something that would be interesting to the Sea Grant programs to at least contribute to in some capacity.
So just a quick follow-up to Jonathan's suggestion, we'd mentioned these RCNs before, and I took a moment to look on the web, and the next deadline for the one that we would be eligible for is early February of 2013. So it's not outside the realm of possibilities. I think the budget's ranged 150 to 200,000 or more. Somebody probably knows, but you know, it's enough to keep us meeting, maybe to support a workshop. Andrew just mentioned that there might be some hardware things that would be good to have that they may not fund, but it could be something, Steve, that we say that a subgroup of us would approach NSF, and the Moore I know wants to see us being entrepreneurial and fundraising, so it's a possibility.
So, action item on this one, Andrew, are you going to agree to put together a syllabus for this training and a budget estimate?
For all the training that I think is necessary?
Yes.
Not a syllabus, but somewhat slightly less detailed level of it, yes.
Enough that we could transmit to others what we have in mind for that week.
Prospectus.
All right, let's continue. What I want to do is make sure, we've got a lot of other things to cover before we turn it over to Skylar, and I got to get it over to you no later than maybe 3 o'clock. How are we doing on time? On +2. Okay, then we're way behind. So, let me cover the other things that are up here. Andrew, actually, I meant to talk with you over lunch. I know that I was able to get you some money out of the California Water Board to help with some of this. I have no idea what you're doing with that specifically, so maybe you can elaborate.
The California Water Board got a group of us together who had Durafet sensors either in the water or going in the water along the coast of California, and said, what would it take to actually have believable pH measurements from these? And everybody agreed that at this stage, probably taking water samples in the neighborhood of the sensor on a regular basis and analyzing it was the way to go. And so they said, fine, we have $64,000. And I said, fine, for that, given what you want measured and the other bits and pieces, that's 428 samples.
Okay, so there's not training involved in that.
And
It's more like quality control on the stuff that you're already measuring.
realistically, what we're going to learn from this is how well multiple different groups actually can take that approach to checking their quality on their samples, how we can make that an easier and more effective way of doing it, and it'll give some information about appropriate practices for dealing with Durafat sensors in this very, very nearshore environment.
But not something that's going to directly tie into the training here.
No.
Okay. All right, so let's move to the first one then. And in specific, Jason, I heard several people at lunch seem very interested in what you were talking about with NIST. So could you elaborate where you're headed with that and essentially where that might head to an action item that ties in to CCAN?
Well, this is an outcome of our pH protocol workshop where we had a representative from NIST who is responsible for developing their reference standards and has been working with Andrew as well, or largely, and aside from waxing philosophically on all aspects of pH for those days, which was above a lot of our heads. It looks like they're more than willing to help develop a set of standards that we can push off to the vendors that are participating in our evaluation, and that will also then be compatible with the dye spectrophotometric method for analysis. So we can at least get everyone talking on the same pH scales, hopefully eliminate some of that variability. And I'm not sure from the few conference calls with the water board that there's been any discussion on what standards are being used to calibrate the CFETs, or but I think that will also come out as, you know, variation in calibration.
So how does that tie into the 4,000 tons of water that he's shipped out? And ultimately, what does it mean to a guy like Alan who is looking for some calibration material?
Perhaps I could answer that. In addition to that 4.5 tons of seawater, we have been shipping a much more modest amount of a tris buffer in a synthetic seawater that we make as a pH reference material. NIST have been asked by colleagues in Europe to help prepare such a tris buffer in seawater for national meteorological institutes to independently verify the calibration of. And it was in the spirit of the fact that they were already doing that they offered ACT portions of that for use in their pH calibration for that particular exercise. This may mean the NIST will say, yes, we can produce a seawater buffered for tris. Currently, if you were to buy buffers from NIST, you actually buy them as a powder kit that you make up, and it costs you a few $100s to make a liter. Thus, many people instead buy standards from companies that produce them, and those commercial companies report their numbers as traceable to NIST. That, I think, is really the role. The NIST will say that, yes, we have a valid standard that you could be traceable to.
I guess the question I'm going to put then to you and Jason is, in the context of essentially standards that could be shipped out to people, are there actions that need to be taken? Is there something that we as a CCAN group can say collectively to a group like NIST, or say collectively to somebody else, we need? Or is that in a sense already covered by the things that you do?
At this time, I think it's covered by the things that we do. Clearly, as the demand grows we would need a different model for how to produce large quantities sustainably. The seawater demand, as I mentioned, has grown very fast. The emphasis on tris, we're currently unable really to keep up with the demand, which is why people that are getting it later than they would have preferred. But at this time, unless somebody forms a company to produce reference materials and sell them to you, we are the only game in town.
Okay. I'll tell you what, given how
And we charge you to, anyway.
Given how we're starting to run out of time, because I've got half hour to finish up before I'm supposed to turn it over to Skylie to cover some of the next steps there. Let me summarize where I think we're at on items 1 and 3, and then go on to talk about items 2 and 4. In terms of items 1 and 3, what I've heard is that we're going to produce essentially some of those how-to manuals in terms of what you measure, or what are your choices of measurements, based upon identifying a few different types of users, different types of environments they work in, or different levels of sophistication. And that will be done by Jason with a committee to help him. What we haven't done yet is identify the committee to help him. Second thing we've identified that we're going to do is move down a training path. And we do have an action item there. The action item there is Andrew's going to put together the prospectus and a budget associated with that prospectus. We haven't yet identified who's going to shop that prospectus, although that will probably come out of some of the discussions that Skylie will lead about where this group goes forward. So, so before we leave this topic, we need to identify who Jason's going to be working with to put the documentation together. I'm sorry, there was a third part that we identified, and Gretchen left the room, that we're going to work towards a video. So when Gretchen comes back, we'll ask her to talk a little bit about the action item there. But
Steve, I have a question with regard to this documentation that we're putting together. Are we putting this together for a single pH monitoring sensor like the Durafet, or for a host of sensors like a CFET or a SAMI and a Durafet?
Okay.
Are we doing one parameter, or are we doing several? Because then it goes to the applicability of it.
okay, so here's my vision, but this is where the group will have to come together. What we have to do, if you remember, we identified different types of users, some in an estuarine environment, some in the marine environment, some that want to do continuous, some that want to do static. What we would do is we pick 2 or 3 of those that we think are the most likely scenarios, the most frequent scenarios, and they would develop a set of recommendations for what are the parameters that you would measure and what are the instruments that you would buy to do that. And then some level of quality assurance aspects associated with that that stops short of training and detail, but enough that it leads into some of the training that Andrew was talking about.
Well, going to
That's what I envisioned.
To Alan's question earlier, have we established that? Are we all concrete on, as of today, what that is?
I think if we had the time, we probably could be, but ideally that's where the subcommittee would advise.
Just to say quickly, for systems aiming to do continuous measurement, the only game in town today is pH and PCO2, like it or not. If you were going to do it discreetly, for the quality of data that we have articulated repeatedly during this meeting, my own opinion is that total carbon and pH make good sense. One could make the case that alkalinity and pH were okay. So those are the ones that I would emphasize.
Do people disagree with that?
I was just going to say, if you're going to, at our level, if you're going to do a discrete sample, you should just ship it out and pay for the sample processing costs. I mean, that's why we need continuous data. That's why we try to use, well, we have DIC at one site location, but that's why we use pH and PCO2. That's why we're trying to get to saturation state. But we're not going to be the level, any sort of acceptable level of precision in a hatchery environment to do a discrete sample. We use discrete samples to check our continuous measurements, and we send those out to labs that know what they're doing to do that. So that's my opinion on discrete sampling.
So that's where I'm coming from. So if from an applied need right now, if we agree that the applied need is for continuous measurement, then if we can agree that yes, our documentation, our training is going to be toward use of pH and PCO2 measuring systems, instrumentation, That's just what I'm trying to confirm so that we know going forward what we're getting into, and then what we're going to ask for training for and what we're going to try and budget for.
I would comment that I think we still have to keep the discrete measurements in mind as well, and that's why I made the comment towards both of those when I said that.
I agree with you, but I think, and I'm looking at it from the shellfish guys, and I think Alan hit it on the head, that to get it to the level of accuracy on the discrete sampling, probably sending somebody that was doing continuous monitoring could then send out those discrete samples and then verify what they're doing on a continuous
Okay, so what we're starting to do, and we're running out of time, is we're starting to burrow down a level. I think at this point we're trying to move towards action items rather than get into the discussion. So one of the action items is there's got to be a committee that Jason interacts with to essentially make exactly the decisions that you're talking about now, as well as work on it and reviews the document. So I guess what I'm looking for is a show of hands of who would like to serve on that committee to work with him.
Steve, I have indicated to Jason that I'd be prepared to work with him on that,
Okay.
but whether that's on the committee or just offering any advice and help I can,
Okay.
we didn't discuss.
You'd be obviously a great choice because ideally what you're going to do is build off of this into the training. Are there others here? I mean, if I were in the lead, you'd all be jumping and say, we can't have him do it, so I better be on the committee. Maybe you're showing too much trust in Jason. But I think I would think a guy like Alan on that committee would be a very good thing to make sure they are working towards exactly the kind of guidance that would make sense to a hatchery. Not necessarily you, because you're further along, but to somebody else. I would think that we'd want one or two other people like Burke, like Francis, who are deeply into this stuff, like Dick.
Well, I would offer Simone Allen from my group.
Okay, Simone?
Has the responsibility to do that.
Others want to serve as, what I'm envisioning is somebody who's basically going to serve on a couple of conference calls with Jason and then do some follow-up to react to the documents. So I see Alan. See Burke.
Any other growers? Ian?
Well,
actually, I'd volunteer Terry because he just installed the equipment.
Perfect.
Okay.
I volunteer Ian.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, I've got critical mass in the sense I've got Andrew, I've got Burke, I've got Alan, and Simone. Others who want to join, that's enough to get us going. Others who want to join, you're not being excluded. Go see Jason. Okay, so we have two other topics. I'm sorry, the last action item is going to be the video. Gretchen had said she wanted to do a video, okay? And so the question to you, Gretchen, is what do you need from this group to move forward in that direction? And how can you tie it into these other products?
So assuming that's something we still want to attempt, we can do that. We'll put it together.
Would you do it around the sensors that he just talked about, the PCO2 and Durafet sensors?
I think we'll do two things. And the expertise I would need here is input on a script. We've both got some footage of training videos that we could use as examples, and we could try a Durafet just to show everyone what it would look like. It may turn out to be a ridiculous exercise, and we say, wow, we don't want to do that. But our experience in other areas has been diverse communities have found these short videos useful. So as I said before, the University of California has funded a collaborative group of faculty members at UC Davis, Bodega Marine Labs, UC Santa Barbara, and here at Scripps. And although we don't have tons of money, most of it is meant for training, we do have some funds that can be dedicated towards group activities and other research product. So I think we could fund this just to see if it would work for us. Andrew, do you have any thoughts on that? I'll do it. We'll figure it out.
I think it's a good idea to just put a couple of example videos together where we're looking at 5 minutes or less to show what could be done. My own picture of this is that ultimately you'll have a website with multiple of these videos that you can choose which one is what you need right now.
Okay. So it's kind of clear we've got a direction. Again, another action item that comes out of this.
Yeah, we'll do it. We'll use a couple of our students and put together just some high def videos of a couple topics, and we can distribute it somehow to everyone and get feedback and see what it looks like.
Okay. So I'm ready to move to those other two topics, but Skyly came over and whispered to me and said there are a few people who need to leave at 3, and she wanted to introduce the other topics that she's going to come, that she's going to assign to deal with, and then maybe what we do is we go there and we'll come back and do my other 2 topics when you're done.
What are your 2 topics?
My 2 topics left are the where to measure. I think that would be relatively short.
Okay.
And then the other one about, so essentially, how do we engage the oozes to become to move from where we're at now to where we need to be?
Carry on. I'm one of the people who asked to leave, and
You'd rather do that one?
well, not rather. I want to do it all, but those are both important.
Okay, so right, what Andrew's saying, which I was going to recommend, is let's not take a break, because from 1:30 to 4 is not that long, and if you need to go to the bathroom, or you need to go grab some coffee, just do it, and we'll keep going continuously. All right, so we're okay, Skyly, with just doing these? Okay, since you need to leave, Jen, maybe we'll do number 4, and we'll come back to number 2.
Okay, actually,
You
I'm
rather
just going to make a recommendation for
How to do number 2?
On number 2, I think quickly. May I take this out of here? Can you hold- Oh, you screwed it in.
So while she's doing that, I actually think number 2 is going to be short and simple, because I guess I'm going to put forward a starting point. Starting point is we're not about design. I think we're exactly where Dick was talking about before. We're about, at this point, just trying to assess where we're at so we could, at some point in the future, develop design. Do people agree with that? What's that?
Thank you.
Because you're going to talk about essentially the detail of how you get to that, right? No? I'll tell you what, you wanted to go? Let you go.
I was just going, Skyly, do you want to say something?
Well, just think, you know, maybe you're going to get here, but I think that what would be really valuable is obviously we're not going to proscribe our network necessarily, because that's a little pie in the sky for us, but to prioritize where we could use additional sensor support gives opportunities to Gretchen and others who are writing grants, and they can plug it in, I think, in a way that has a framework coming from this group.
I think all of those are on the design arena, those comments. And what I'm here to talk about is that if you want a network, and a network that you're going to get data from, currently the dots on the map are the dots that one of the regional RAs has, one of the IUS RAs has the data stream from, okay? I see 6 gliders. I see some surveys up in Puget Sound, and of course the Cal Coffee surveys and maybe other surveys in California. And then there's a host of platforms. But I know that not all of the OA assets are on here, and I spoke with Francis about the omegas. So we got to get omegas into Senkus or Nanus or whoever, but we've got to identify those key OA assets that currently aren't part of this system. And we've got to assess whether the RAs have the wherewithal or the funds or whatever to get those in. But that's what we should be figuring out. And I don't know if there's the NPDES monitoring, et cetera. But right now, this is on the website that Diane sent you the link for. Check it out. And this is how we're going to deliver the data as of now. And if there's things that aren't there, they need to get there. Dick.
My first point is that there are several things that are not there. Okay. For example, the NOAA survey cruises ought to be there, but there are many things that are not there. The Marine Sanctuaries Program data sets are not there. The point I would like to make is that we haven't done the appropriate survey and commitment of people that would participate in this process. And that's a critical thing we need to do now, and a critical thing that has to be part of the the report as far as I can see. So what we need to do is assign somebody who's willing to provide that, to go out and find out what pieces are not there, ask those people if they will contribute to the map so they will be there.
Yep.
And I think we do want to define what it is now. We also want to define what it is we would like it to be. But we first have to have what the commitments are before we can say what it should be in addition to that. And I just wanted to point out that there's a lot of things missing.
I agree. I think we should do three things, I guess. One is figure out what is our optimal design that we want to be working toward. The second would be see what's missing and how we can or can't get that into this system. And three is, have this as...
But I would argue that the optimal design should come after we figure out what it is we have now.
Okay, I'm good with that.
Okay.
I just, they don't need to be sequenced the way I said it. Yeah. I agree with what you said.
All right, so I'm trying to work towards action items. And in some cases, the action items are things we do now, and sometimes the action items are things that we have to go write grant proposals for. I guess in this particular case, you've put forward a very specific suggestion that seems very doable in the short term. Who's going to do it?
I think IOS should do it.
Okay? And when you say IOS, that IOS is the national office. I can't believe that they would do it. So that becomes then the three oozes that are on the West Coast.
Steve?
West Coast.
IUS might do it. Zdenko Willis was the one that the IUS office in D.C. that originally gave us this $10,000 to start talking about this.
Okay.
So they're on top of it. They might be willing to do this.
So as it turns out...
Let me say it more specifically. Nanos should do it. Jan should do it. Now I know it'll get
There
done.
you go. Now we're talking.
Now I know it'll get done.
So, Jan, and I happen to see your guy in the back raising his hand. I don't know whether that's protest or yeah.
Emilio is the brains of Nanus.
Anton Braun. Just some clarifications. The it that we're talking about is the enhancing that initial inventory that we were seeing so that it does reflect what we know exists, right? Not steps beyond that. What you see there is a preliminary step. It was built entirely out of the goodwill and extra time, whatever that may be, from the three RAs, each contributing equally, and talking to the appropriate people and harassing people. My only role, or Nanos's only role, was in bringing us all together and doing the final pushes, I guess, to create the single data file. And by the way, the data file is not available yet, but it will be by the end of this week. It'll be an Excel file and other forms that you can grab and do whatever you want. To go beyond that would take probably a significant amount of effort and definitely wouldn't be able to, I think Nanos and myself would be in a position to coordinate that, but we wouldn't be able to, it is not optimal for someone in Washington to be prodding the local people in California to find all the relevant information. I would advocate an approach that was similar to what we did, where each RA works with the local people to identify what is missing and harass people as needed and get the information.
Okay, but here's the point I'm getting at. It's not enough just to put a dot on the map. We have to have the dots on the map. We don't have that now. It's not enough. You also have to put the contact persons behind those dots and ask them if they are committed or not committed. That's the point I'm trying to get at. It's 3 steps I want to see get it done. I'd like to see those 3 steps culminate in a document on the web that says, here it is, here's the contact persons, and they have made commitments. Those are the things. Now, I'm naive about what's the best way to do it, and your recommendations, as far as I can see, are just fine. Those are good recommendations, but we got to agree that this is the point we want to be at by the time we submit that final report, and that's what I'm trying to drive home here. It's the same thing to me as what we have produced for the International Observing System. Every time you click on a dot on that observing system, a person's name comes up and says, there's the contact person who is willing to be the contact person to say, here's where the data comes from. That's what I'm driving at, is where we want to be.
at least in terms of just speaking for this particular effort and the amount of effort that took, I really can't speak for the other RAs, but a good chunk of time was spent on this. I'm not sure that we can, I mean, CCAN is not, ocean acidification is an important part of our missions in general, but we are stressed with tons of commitments, and I imagine that the extra level of work to get to the point that you're specifying, which we can all agree is where we want to be, that would be feasible within the time frame of this report, which I'm not sure what it is, but I imagine it's a few months. Within the existing, I mean, just asking the different arrays, much less NANUs, to do that extra work. That's, I don't know, maybe Jan has a different opinion than others, so.
Well, I would argue very strongly that we ask them to do that. That's what, for my vote, I would say that has to be done. I would also say that within the time frame of this report, it's very doable.
I'm sorry, and what is the time frame again?
He said December 1st.
And what's the information you want?
3 things. A map of what the design is now, for every program that's represented there, who the contact person is, and a commitment from that contact person, they want to be part of CCAN. And there was a third thing, I forgot now. The third thing is have this on the web. All that is doable.
The last part is very easy. It's the legwork of following up and ensuring replies that I personally would be concerned about. This is not a technology problem whatsoever. It's just the legwork and time.
I think being part of CCAN needs to be defined. I can't just call up, you know, person X and say, do you want to be part of CCAN? And they'll say, well, what's that going to mean?
It means we have to agree that they'll submit their data to CCAN.
Well, they're submitting their data to NANUS or SENCUS or SCUS. So.
That's part of CCAN.
Okay.
It's not more work. That's what I'm trying to get. It's not a lot more work. Remember, we did this whole thing at the international level in the same amount of time. We're not really asking to do a whole lot more work.
Well, I can get you started. One of us two is the contact person for our 4 stations, and we're committed. And then there's the Omegas group over here. And
now you get
somebody's the
Francis
contact.
to say the same thing for
it's-
Omegas.
I just
We're
made the list for
committing
you.
NOAA to this operation. We have the will to do that.
I mean, I think I'm not being naive, but I mean, the reason we're here is that we are committed to sharing data. So, I mean, right off the bat, I think, again, everybody can fill in that data sheet in 5 minutes, and we'll have a great start. If there are other people who are excited about CCAN and want to come in, that'd be great. But as far as the timeline for this document, we want to see the people who are committed right now, and it's 5 minutes.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. So I'll qualify what I've said by saying that for the sites that are already there, doing what you're saying, having that commitment be part of the data set is something definitely achievable. And we can definitely follow up. Since everyone here is committed on site, I can totally see that with each RA coordinating with the who provided the data to them, that we can get that information. It's the data site, the sites, the dots that are not there that I can't really, I don't feel I'm in a position to give an answer how much legwork that would be.
No, it's not a lot. It's an easy request to make. I would say if you get the commitment here with the people that are in this room, that is a significant portion of what you have to do in the first place. And if we can get more, we should get more. But we're like at 80% or 90% of what we want. Let's get that for sure and get those commitments now and go after that other 10%. We will have a much better product if we do that. Should be aggressive.
Okay, that sounds like an action item, and Dick and I and Amelia will lead that.
Yep. Cool. All right, so let's move then to the last technical item I had, which was how to provide the data once it's collected. So we just agreed we're all going to want to share data, and oops. This is the one that scares me the most, because to create a network, if we can get everybody to agree upon the quality level, and we're after saturation state, and we're after this level of quality, that's great, and we can actually get to achieve that, But then to really pull it all together, we need to be able to share data. We need to be able to share it in a way that provides the data. We need to be able to share it in a way that provides the metadata. And we need to define the data standards and the metadata standards. Yeah. Then, once we have that, we need some way of pulling it back out, visualizing it, not just for ourselves, but for a lot of the people we're trying to share it with, and connecting them to it. And I guess in all of the discussions we had, I don't know, we had a committee that was supposed to deal with this. Did that committee ever meet?
I think what I learned from Diane is that there are some notes there. I scanned them quickly. I think there are some useful things, but some of it is aspirational and not so detailed. Amelia, I'm going to put you on the spot again and ask, I can't see you, in your workings with Hernan and the other guy. Pardon? Yeah, NODC in general, and there was somebody else who were working with as well. Are any of these things defined or vis-a-vis OA, or are they still in the same boat that CCAN is right now?
The most concrete outcome that I can think of from NODC. So the most concrete outcome of from NODC that I can recall is a template. It was intended to be transformed into a metadata form or template for OA data. It is readily accessible. I think it was distributed from Hernan a couple of months ago to a wide range of groups. It did get input from the community of data managers that met at the March meeting. I suspect it didn't get, I can't remember, but I suspect it didn't get a ton of input from others. Scientists, for example. So it does exist. It is available. Okay. Some thought has gone into it. I can't say, and I've looked at it, I can't say whether this community would feel it's 70% of the way or 95% of the way, but it's definitely a starting point.
Okay, that's wonderful. Alex Kozier was the other guy I was thinking of, Emilio.
But definitely in this case, Hernan and NODC are the point people.
Excellent.
And NODC has an explicit role in OA. I forget exactly how it's phrased, but they're in charge of the data issues at the national level.
So would that be, sorry, let me ask my question then, Dick, yield to you. Would that be something then that what we could do is send that out to the CCAN group and see, or maybe a subset, and see whether that template would be appropriate, whether we need more, whether it's 70% or 2% or 100%?
If you recall in the March meeting, Alex Kozier was pressing very hard for a metadata template that he has already developed, and it's part of the International Carbon Program. So we were working from something that the International Carbon Program had already approved, and he was pushing for that. So that then went as an action item to work out with NODC, and they're working together on that now. Alex has been visiting NODC to work out those details. So the most probable step that would occur is that to interact both with Alex and NODC to see how well they've come together on the development of that metadata forms, and see if we can't work with that as our template that we would want to work from. In most cases, I think it would be just fine, particularly since the carbon data is very specific on what we want. So my suggestion is we just follow through on that process that's occurring.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good. Done.
I've got a chat from Terry wanting to know how long do the OOSs hold the data in, is the OOS data validated, calibrated, or raw?
I'll tell you what, that's a level of detail far beyond what we're going to cover in the next 5 minutes. I want to follow up on where we're at, because the way I'm looking at it, the question in front of us is kind of moving forward, is has there been enough work done that we can finish out this project and say, here are the metadata standards, here are the data standards, and now it's, in a sense, implementation, and what we need to do is go get the money for the users to actually house it. Or are we still at the design phase, and essentially the next task or the next money that we have to get is to do the design?
Well, it sounds like from what Dick said, and Emilio, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like Alex and Hernan have put a lot of thought into this metadata template, and it seems like something that is being done on a national level and would behoove CCAN to avail itself. So until we see it, until we circulate it, we don't know for sure, but my sense is that that's the direction we should go.
And that's what I got out of the conversation. I just wanted to confirm that, in which case the action item would be circulate this document, and get some feedback from people and see if we can come to agreement and incorporate that as part of the final report that says those are going to be CCAN standards.
Yep.
Alternatively, if circulated, we find out it's not acceptable, there are too many hiccups, then we have to go some other direction.
My guess is that CCAN should adopt whatever NODC adopts, and if we think that the NODC template is deficient, we should work with NODC to make it sufficient.
Okay.
I completely agree with that. I think it would be inefficient to try to do otherwise. I just wanted to clarify, though, that that still, even adopting that, even assuming that that's ready and we can just adopt it, that doesn't get us everything that is listed there.
That's correct. I want to go to some of these other things next, but this is the first step.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is, who's going to take responsibility for circulating that, taking the feedback, and kind of standardizing this?
If someone sends me an email to bug me, I'll contact Hernan and NODC and
okay.
Circulate.
So
or
Jan, you'll send
coordinate.
him an email to bug him?
No, you'll send me an email to bug me, and I'll send an email to bug Emilio.
Okay. Eventually, Emilio will do it, regardless of who bugs him.
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
So then let's move on to the next part. Assuming that we standardize, it seems the next step is we need, if we've agreed, have we agreed that the oozes are going to be the places we send the data? Is there anybody who disagrees with that?
I think the way you should lay that out is oozes / NODC, so you understand a fixed sequence.
Yes, I completely agree. I was going to make that clarification, that there are complementary roles, and NODC ultimately should be an important part of this.
Okay. All right, does everybody agree with that? The friendly amendment. Okay, that having been said, Jan, you're not going to do it for free, I imagine. And neither are the other, I'm part of SCOOS, I'm sure we won't do it for free. What's it going to take? What's the action item that we need to do? Is it simply bugging Zdenka to say this is part of what you do and you need to up the money? Is it outside funds that need to come in?
I would say all of the above. I think, I can't pull a pocket out or pull a number out of my hip pocket and tell you it's going to be this, but can the IUS office help with this? I don't know. Can we find foundation funds? I don't know. Can this West Coast Governors Alliance be something that can help with that? I don't know, but I think we need to keep our eye on the ball on all of these because my sense is there's never too much money.
So Skylar, this will eventually, this is an action item that goes to funding, so that's one of the things that will then fall into your presentation. Not necessarily you have to do it, but essentially talking about the leadership and who's going to take on. I will tell you there is an opportunity that will present itself that I'll take responsibility for. Is the SCOOS Governing Board is meeting probably in this room on November 8th, and Zdenka Willis will be at that meeting, and I've been tasked to add a couple of hours of agenda item on what comes out of this to what does SCOOS start to do differently as a result of this meeting. And of course it will be done in front of Zdenka, and one of the things we'll make very clear is this group wants the oozes to be, but how are we going to get from here to there? So that will be a way of engaging Zdenka at actually several levels, but the data management for sure.
Just so you know, because I know the insides of these data management systems pretty well, is they'll need resources both for the oozes and for NODC to carry this out.
Okay.
Just if I can add a bit to what Jan was saying about the WCGA data efforts, both Jan and I are on the action coordination team for that new effort. It's called the RDF, the Regional Data Framework. And I'm the lead of the IT advisory group for the group. That's already rolling. There is a group that's already developing or gathering input and developing options. And there's even a second funding package, I guess, that's been approved already. So we should definitely take advantage of that as much as possible. The focus right now and for the near future will be on cataloging system of data sets. And I can see that a focus on those metadata templates could go hand in hand with something of that sort to be able to find data sets. They are very unlikely anywhere in the near future, I think, to do the sort of things we do in the USIS or I use in terms of providing actual data flows to make the actual data values integrated and flowing. But I think that's complementary, that the strengths of the USIS and what this West Coast cataloging effort are doing will be very, very complementary. And the way they're operating, they are trying to meet the needs of the other acts, 7 acts that are topically focused. And they are going to prioritize, if any one community, whether it's an act or a group that is closely linked to the focus of an act, if any one community is willing to step up and work really closely with this project, I know that they or we will be very receptive to that. So I think.
Okay, so I'm going to do. So I'm going to leave it as the action item. Is we know that we want the users to do this. The users need to start talking to each other. They need to start figuring out what kind of proposals they might want to be writing. But CCAN is committed to writing the support letters and acting on their behalf to get them some funds to do this. That's the action item? Okay, so I've gone over. I was supposed to be done by 3 because I think we had 2 things left. Skylar was going to go through and cover some of these topics. And then I think we were going to finish up with Gretchen was going to try and lead us through and see if we can come up with 3 or 4 bullet points that we would use as the points that we want to make at the high CO2 conference that's coming up. Kind of what does CCAN want to say to the world? Is that what you want to finish? If we have time.
We can leave at 3:15 and we should be
okay. But I think I want to thank you all. We got through all the technical things, and I think we ended up with a bunch of pretty specific action items. So with that, I get to sit down and start.
I have to get rid of the car. That's another.
Yeah, but you can drop me off.
Good news, everybody. I'm going to be mercifully short and crisp and not even to the point, but just to get us out. And I think we have, what, 6 more minutes on the pastries, and then they disappear forever? This has been honestly very interesting and grueling from somebody who doesn't have to make these measurements. It was eye-opening to see, you know, how difficult this is. It's very. I frankly came from a position of understanding that there was a new sensor called a Durafet, and our problems were solved. And let's just buy a bunch of them. They're much cheaper. And okay, how much money do we need? Let's put them all over the place. And while I've been listening to this conversation by pure coincidence, I'm answering and responding to emails of Kat Coleman, who in California has the lead oceans position as the Deputy Director of Ocean and Coastal Matters, among other things, asking OA specific questions in anticipation of our Ocean Protection Council meeting on the 13th. And, you know, it just is becoming increasingly clear that it's really hard for us to think about hardcore policy and regulations for something that we're not ready to measure. And we have a lot of work to do, and just in hearing how this community has come together in a very healthy, positive way, and the time that Andrew and others are putting into this transfer of knowledge and growing us up together, I think is almost unprecedented. In fact, I asked Steve if he can think of a commensurate effort that's pulled us so far for so long, and he's an old dog. He's the oldest dog I know, and he said no, he can't think of it. So, I mean, I think we need to be mindful and step back and continue to congratulate ourselves on how far we've come. That being said, we need to keep the heat on going forward. I don't want the twilighting of this Moore grant to be the twilighting of this effort or this group. And I think we have identified terrific next steps. And I think what my role is to be part cheerleader and part drumbeater. And I'm in a reasonable position to be able to do that, particularly because we have leaders like Dick Feely who are saying that, you know, what CCAN's doing is frankly in a position to lead the globe. You know, we are pulling all of us together in this very thoughtful way and setting up a model that we can continue to feed on modularly. And those kinds of efforts I think are really critical, but it's going to take each one of us to recognize what it is that are our guiding principles, that we need to collaborate and cooperate and to share and to keep working together so that we gain an understanding of this in an effective and proficient way. Washington, we said this earlier, has done a lot of the hard work on this. California will be following suit in a much less aggressive, I think, less ambitious way, but something that's going to be ongoing and not just a single shot. So I think that, as we've discussed before, we've got sort of the bookends around Oregon, so we can just humiliate them into doing what they need to do. I look forward to having those conversations. West Coast Governors offers a terrific opportunity there, and I know we're teed up for those as well and beginning that. We also need to lean on, frankly, Stu, you're here going back to Washington, D.C. You're not going to leave without an action item, which is, you know, I want you to help us understand what the climate folks are talking about out there, and to do the transfer of knowledge right to the heart of DC about this effort, and keep your eyes open for funding opportunities, and we'll be continuing to create very discrete and specific funding requirements that are evocative of our approach, which is leveraging everybody's help and cobbling these things together. And I'm hoping that's the message that you have, is that we've got a community that's coming together, and just keep your eyes open on our behalf. And Diane, Climate Nexus, you know, you're one of the communicators around this issue, and I'm hoping that you're kind of seeing that there's something pretty special that's happening West Coast wide here. And we've come really far, we're going really far, but if you can tip us off or help to promote and energize what it is we're doing and get that word out, we'll take you up on that. So you can't leave without an act. That little pastry came with a price. We are at a tipping point. You know, we could tip forward or we could tip back, and I think that that with Andrew and Steve and Jan and Dick and everybody else in this room, Alan and others, we're presently about to tip forward, and the opportunities are honestly piling up. I'm pretty excited about, obviously WAML is a huge opportunity, and I'm thrilled to think about these training exercises. One thing Juliet said as she left, which was on behalf of USC Sea Grant, she thinks they're very interested. She said it out loud, and she whispered it again, in supporting that kind of thing and cobbling together that with other opportunities. The outreach we can get directly from Sea Grant. She's saying we're in, so they can write about this effort and begin to, this I'm projecting on them, they didn't say to me, but perhaps begin to offer granting opportunities around some CCAN priorities, and I think that we can talk to them about how to set those things up. We need to be moving forward in a multi-pronged approach. So in talking to some of you, am identifying a really clear opportunity for somebody to own this, a postdoc to own some of these next steps, a postdoc to think about the data that are out there, how do we daylight and data mine, how do we go forward, how do we cobble together some of these interactions, where's that elbow grease come from, somebody who's got the technical expertise to work in the policy boundary. You know, once we prioritize all of our asks and where they're going to, I would like to help spearhead that conversation with some foundations that I think will get some effort in. But, question?
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to be ready. A couple of things on the issue of the postdoc. The three RAs have been talking for several months about the possibility of getting a Sea Grant fellow to collaborate with the WCGA data efforts. We haven't picked a specific topic, but it sounds to me, and Jan would not disagree, that this would be a perfect focus area that could merge the CCAN interest with the WCGA data cataloging efforts with USIS. And we've
done. I'm easy. Jan agrees. Thank you, Jan.
Jan doesn't disagree.
Oh, good.
Yes, I didn't think she would. There was a survey made as part of the ongoing WCGA data effort, a survey made to reaching out to the different acts on data needs. And we managed to, as they were drafting the survey, we managed to throw in one specific question about oceanographic data, and we were astounded to hear that it was the only category, out of all possible marine planning data, the only category that got a yes from every single act.
Is that right?
Which is great, and it also, we intend to use that to ask for some of the money that has been approved from NOAA already to help pitch together this postdoc or fellow. I mean,
Brilliant.
the plans are not completely concrete there yet, but if we can bring all this interest together, I think we have the makings of something great.
Brilliant, and I think that's just the kind of effort that each of us is got to undertake, and that's an exciting one. You know, again, I'm a big advocate of us cobbling together these various efforts and then calling them under the umbrella of the guiding principles that is becoming CCAN, and I think those are the kinds of things that we need to capture and begin to codify. This is a push me, pull you, where it's you know, the efforts of CCAN can drive the granting opportunities, and conversely, the granting opportunities can trickle down onto CCAN. And this is what I wrote down as a tithe, but I think that has some negative connotations right now. But that's where, as we're learning from Gretchen and others who are going after National Science Foundation grants, there's a way to serve up this outreach portion of the grant by saying that you're supporting this larger regional-wide effort that in turn will be serving up to policy decisions and so forth. And, you know, CCAN is there to help you with that part of your grant. That's us working for you. It's not always the other way around. I said SEPs. I think there is a ton of opportunity for us to think about this, and we don't have to now, but if a discharger has accumulated penalties or fines, they can offset those by either supporting a discrete activity that the water board supports, and I got away with putting the first pH sensor on the Pacific coast at Bodega Marine Lab by writing a SEP. And I'm thrilled to say, particularly now that I have no confidence whatsoever in those early data, but I can't get away with it. I put it in the water and it had a bunch of numbers come out. And we wrote off $50,000 worth of fines, and that was great. But there's a way to use that as an opportunity to fund these discrete projects. The other one, we lost Jan, but this is coming under Steve Weisberg's leadership as a co-chair with Jan Newton for a meeting, the Coastal and Estuarine Research Federation, which is November 2013 here in San Diego. One of the plenary talks is going to be discussing both the impacts, the policy opportunities, and inshore estuarine acidification, and that will in turn spur a session and a series of talks on this. I think there's an opportunity for us to use this as a staging ground. Steve went so far as to say that we can build on that and have an entire extra day all around this issue. It's more than a year away, but by that time we will have advanced some of the other action items, and we can literally use that as a platform to talk about CCAN, where it's come and where it's going and where it's taking us. So I want us to put that on our calendar. And Alan, I understand that you're going to be one of the plenary speakers as well. Is that right? Super. And done. You're critical for that. Other thoughts, you know, we have obviously a terrific opportunity with foundations, but the foundations these days, as everybody understands, are not going to just write us a check and say, go forth and do good OA work. We need to come to them with a plan, a very carefully thought out, prioritized plan, a framework. We need to come to them with in-kind support or various other support. And I think this group is in a terrific position to prioritize and demonstrate outcomes in a very careful, thoughtful way. I don't want us to keep referring to the foundations as, you know, they're just kind of this ATM machine, because they're frankly pretty tough on us. So we need to be incredibly careful and incredibly thoughtful about how we're pinging on them. We're not working at cross purposes. And I think that there's maybe a subcommittee in our future to think about how to get the best of our thinking for what are the next steps, and I'd like to work with all of you on that. Just as an aside, California has a new network of MPAs, and one of the things that we want to be thinking about is what the MPAs can do for California beyond the stated goals. You know, we're monitoring those. There's a commitment to monitor them at some level, and not just to detect their own performance, but what can they tell us about climate change? What can they tell us about fisheries? What can they tell us about ocean acidification and others? I think this is a terrific group. This isn't a priority. It's probably a year out, can help think about how we can use the MPAs to think about ocean acidification. That being said, we've got a terrific amount of ideas going forward, but it also brings me back to there was life before the Moore grant. And this goes back to what we've heard earlier in some of the early meetings that were hosted at SCORP. And, you know, what did that take, Steve, to pull meetings together when we didn't have a funder to pay for them all?
I think it was $32,000. Basically, it was on the order of $5,000 from each of the 4 sea grants. The Ocean Science Trust kicked in $5,000. I think my organization underwrote a little bit of it.
Well, you were all in kind.
Right. Well, in kind, and plus I underwrote the little bit of overage we had, but it's in the $30,000 to $35,000 range, of course, with everybody's services for free.
I just think that, you know, going forward as we develop and work through some of these action items, that it is within our collective budgets. The Ocean Science Trust and SCORP and Sea Grants, I know, are still in to pull these efforts together, probably at a more of a task force level, so that we can get together and huddle for a day around some of these working items, get together, huddle for a day around a grant proposal, think about exactly what it's going to take to implement and message and market a training opportunity if that's indeed necessary. Make sure that we've got everybody in the tent that needs to be in the tent. Yep.
No, I was just going to add that IUS National did 10,000. So we may be able to go back to Sedenka.
Super. Who is anybody invited to your SCOOS meeting, Steve, or how does that work?
I guess technically it's an open meeting.
But I mean, is there a role for folks to participate?
It's a SCOOS governing board meeting, of which this will be an agenda item probably for about 2 hours out of the entire day. I don't know that it would be worthwhile for this group to show up, although if there are a few individuals that would make sense. I mean, Andrew's right here at Scripps, and the meeting will be at Scripps, so it would make an awful lot of sense for him to walk down the hall. Obviously, there's probably 1 or 2 others, and I saw Mark in the back. It probably would make a little bit of sense. And there are probably a couple of others that, as I put the agenda together, I haven't tapped them yet. But there are a few people here who I'm going to come and ask to speak to provide some perspective. So, but in terms of being open, I don't know if it's worth people's trip otherwise.
I just want us to keep the heat on and the momentum. We heard from Gretchen how we're part of a call-out box that's going to, you know, if it gets accepted, it's going to mention this effort and this group and the role that it has sort of region-wide, the role that it has in thinking very carefully through what it is we know and coming together in a way that we can provide that information to decision makers, so they need to know how and when to act on ocean acidification if indeed it's appropriate. I also, you know, we have this effort, CCAN, written into the Ocean Protection Council's 5-year strategic plan, that this is going to be the authoritative body that they're going to be participating in. You know, so there are these things that begin to codify and call us together, and we want to continue to find that so that we can use this as a springboard for granting operations and funding operations. And this is, I think, falling upon everybody. I've got there, and then Debbie, yes.
Yeah, I don't know if this was mentioned before, but I didn't want to leave without mentioning that SCOOS and ourselves were contacted by Danielle Lipsky from the Channel Island National Marine Sanctuary, and when they heard about the inventory that we were putting together for SECAN, I learned that this was a month ago or a month and a half ago that the National Marine Sanctuaries of the West Coast published a plan, what they call an action plan for ocean acidification, exactly a year ago. And there seem to be really good opportunities. And they're at a phase right now very similar to what we're doing with this inventory. And they were very interested in talking and seeing what sort of collaboration or coordination could be done.
We don't have any representative from any sanctuaries here, do we?
I mentioned to Danielle at the time that this meeting was happening, so that would be a good to follow up.
Excellent one. Yeah, I have an opportunity to do that, so I can also, you know, it can take many conversations at all kinds of levels, so I'll certainly do that. And then Debbie?
Yeah, two things actually. One follow-up that I yesterday was at a meeting with the Farallones National Marine Sanctuary for climate change indicators workshop they were doing, and it was interesting. Of the 4 groups that were pulled together that came forward with indicators, that only 2 of them brought forward ocean acidification. So it was obvious that at least in some of those arenas, the thoughts about ocean acidification, that there's still some education and you know, getting to know those people and let them know who we are, and to develop those collaborations. Following up on that, I just was curious about what was happening with our website. I know that that is a major outreach type of venue that we can use, and I know that there's been some effort to that, and I'm just thinking that as an action item or as something going forward, in the way of needing more funding or something. What is happening with that?
We have a commitment from Gretchen, and did you want to say?
Yeah, I was just going to give her the update that thanks to Gretchen and MSI, we have a home, and basically we're going on as we have gone on. Mm-hmm. I know Terry King was one who wanted to be involved in, as we do, you know, updating and reformatting, whatever. She wanted to be involved in basically the subcommittee, Skylie, that you were going to be in charge of. But right now we're good to go. Gretchen's going to have some IT help for me so that I can build a web page for this, and we'll be able to post all of the presentations and the video, hopefully, if we have enough funding to do it. And then, you know, everything that we've had, and we've got all of that already. And then I'm still on a virtually daily basis posting things that I see that are relevant to West Coast, to things that we think are interesting or necessary.
Yeah, just basically, we are committed to housing the page in our servers, and it's sort of like a homegrown, homespun web page. We don't have any webmaster designation, but it is a CMS system, a content management system, so it's fairly easy for us to manipulate. And so, but with that said, we're very open to other possibilities if there's a next step that might look better, another place or another way to present the webpage.
Yeah, I think it's in a great spot right now, and you know, there's been talk about doing a revamp or going over the content and thinking about it. That, to me, with your sort of stabilizing it for the moment and Diane's ongoing stewarding of it, it's very important and it's critical, but it's squared away for the time being, and I look forward to a recycle. But is that imminent? Do we need to do that imminently?
I guess at a lower priority, I would think. We've got other stuff. But yeah, the one thing that I would recommend and ask, plead, when things are happening, when new buoys come online, or when papers are published, or whatever information that would be of interest to us,
feed it on.
Let me know. A lot of times I'm pulling it off of APOCA, which is not right. We're here, so.
So this issue of connectivity, I think that we're doing a good job. I'm imploring everybody not to think that this is our last workshop because it's the last fully funded workshop, but rather to think that we need to continue to stay connected. I'd like to be reaching out to a subset of folks to begin thinking about strategies around funding, so that's something that I'll be pinging on people individually and pulling us together. continue to find ways to interlock. I think we're doing that with the Washington effort and the California effort. Other thoughts?
I wanted to bring up, going back to National Marine Sanctuaries, can we do that?
Sure.
On the connectivity aspect here, there is a meeting coming up that I just found the reference to. It's the West Coast Regional National Marine Sanctuaries Education Team that's coordinating the upcoming ocean acidification and record practices workshop. And it's just after the September CO2 conference is happening in Monterey. So there is awareness that's going on there.
Perfect. And we can ping on them in advance and invite them to our lunch and make sure that everybody understands what the other guy's doing. Swap a little spit. Good. Excellent. Question?
Sort of. So, Skyly, Andrew asked me to be the penultimate wrap-up here. So, Steve and I were talking, and it's become very clear to us that you're making really good sense up there, and we need leadership on the steering committee, and we'd like to hear you say it out loud that you'll, be the leader of our conference calls and take CCAN into the next stretch. Would you please, I'm speaking for everyone, of course, but we're looking at you. Will you do it? Do I have to? No, I'm going to miss my gentleman caller.
I think the Ocean Science Trust is a terrific place to provide staff support for those kinds of things, and it would be my privilege to continue to carry on with everybody's support, of course. And I'm very happy to provide that structure and to continue.
Applause now.
Oh.
Okay.
But I'm a little drunk on that pastry.
You're drunk on that pastry. That's right. That was a spiked pastry. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Andrew. But before I do that, I'm going to say that in honor of you taking that on, I will spearhead a subgroup to go after that RCN money. So I'll be emailing people like Jonathan and Brad Warren, and we'll see what we can do. Andrew, take it away.
Well, all I really wanted to say at the end of this is thank you. Thank you to those kind people that signed the card I was given yesterday for the amazing jewelry-like paperweight people gave me. And just to remind people that I put a list of people we should acknowledge on the end of the agenda, the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation for the funding that they have given for our meetings and for the work we are getting done. Diane, for the efforts that she's put in throughout, making sure that CCAN and its activities keep organized. The members of the CCAN Steering Committee who've been on numerous teleconferences and thinking about this and putting efforts in over and above their day jobs. Of course, all of you, the people that have come to these workshops, because that's really what's made it CCAN. It's not just having a steering committee and having a grant, it's having the people who are interested enough to put their time into this to come to the workshops and talk more about it. And then for local arrangements for this meeting in particular, Donna Stout, who helped organize the use of this facility, and Beverly Kennedy, who is the person that will shepherd your requests for reimbursement through the UCSD system. No small feat in itself. So just thank you to all of you for that. Thanks.